there, it's Terry Atkinson from Atkinson Designs, and I've just turned this on about a minute early so we can just check and make sure everything is good to go. Technology and I are not best friends, so we never know what kind of interesting problems we're going to have. I'm happy to be here. I almost didn't make it because I locked myself in the bathroom this morning putting lotion on before I opened the doorknob. So I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but I'm here and I'm excited to be here. And it looks like we're going and we're doing okay. So let's just get started. Again, I'm Terry Atkinson from Atkinson Designs, and today we're going to talk about table runners, and we're going to get those table runners out of your sewing room and onto your table, which is a good thing. And I've been doing a lot of, being home all the time, I've been doing a lot of cooking. And cooking and quilting have they kind of are parallel to me. I've been trying all sorts of new recipes. You have those recipes that you always make where, oh my gosh, dinner, everybody's hungry, what am I going to do? And you go grab a pack of hamburger out of the freezer and you have one thing that you always do with it that's really easy. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching table runners today. Is I want you to have some things up your sleeve that are just always easy and you can get them done. And just like eating, sometimes there's like a big holiday and you have a huge meal that you've been preparing for days and everybody comes. And sometimes it's just let's throw something on the table or let's order out and have something to eat, and it's happy and good and satisfying, but it was a lot less work. So there's all sorts of options, but I tend to go towards the let's just get something on the table and have it be easy and good. I can see over here some of the comments. We've got New Mexico and Iowa. Gotta love Iowa. That's where Hen and Chicks is. And more Iowa, and lots of people flipping through. And today it's kind of, oh, we have a Minnesota. All righty. Patty's from Minnesota. That's where I'm from. And we have had crazy weather lately. It was 14 degrees when we got up about a week ago. Monday, I went for a walk. It was 84. I actually got sunburned. Who knew that was going to be an option? And I got all my summer clothes out. I have a summer t-shirt on today because I'm an optimist. We're going to keep this warm weather and we're going to be going strong with that. So definitely, as you're watching, I would love to have questions from you. My hubby, Kirk, is watching for comments and he'll let me know if there's questions. There's kind of a little bit of a lag time. So if I don't answer right away, I will answer. And if I missed your comment, we'll answer in the comments after the video. So we'll definitely get your questions answered. And click the little like button and let's have hearts sprinkled everywhere, and tell us where you're watching from so that we can see everybody, and you'll be surprised. There's probably someone watching from your neighborhood. So let's get going. Okay, the question that I get more often than any other question is, okay, your instructions were great. Now I finished this. How do I quilt it? What do I do? How do I finish it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I kind of think of quilting is like a buffet for eating. And that is, there's all these different choices. And sometimes you just stand there and you don't know what to do. But we're going to talk about some real simple things that you can do to make your table runners turn out really well and, of course, really fast. That's like the best thing. So I also tend to talk too fast, so comment if I'm talking too fast, and Kirk will wave at me and try and make me go slower, but, good luck with that. So starting out, first of all, my first tip is for your backing. And I've got a little... Let me just grab it and show you. I've got a little mini brick road table topper that I made. I made it shorter than the pattern because I have a short table that I want to put it on. And I always have Christmas ornaments in a bowl that I put out. So that's what my big plan is for this one. And so I had 2 fat quarters that somehow never made it into a project. And I love these prints, but they're kind of busy. And so they're perfect for on the back where they didn't actually end up on the front. And as I'm holding this up, you can see that this is really crisp. And the reason for that is I have taken Mary Ellen's Best Press. Where can I put Mary Ellen so you can see her? This is a challenge. I'm always challenged. This is kind of backwards, upside down and backwards. Anyway, I magic size my background. So I'll iron it flat and steam it. And then I'll spray it with magic sizing and press it. And that will make it crisper. But I don't just do that one time. I do that 3 times. Because I want to have my backing be really, really crisp. And that's going to make probably the biggest difference for not getting any little tucks or wrinkles on the back of your table runners. So you're going to spread that backing out. You're going to magic size it. Use Mary Ellen's Best Press or sizing, whatever you have, and get that all pressed and crisp and nice and flat. And that is really going to make a huge difference. Next, we have to talk about the batting. And one of my favorites for table runners is the Hobbs 80/20. And what I like to do is I like to buy yardage and then I have it on hand, because it seems like I'm always sewing at like 11, 12 o'clock at night. Everybody else is sleeping and I'm up. Oh my gosh, I got to finish this project. And so I'll buy 1.25 yards of the really wide batting, and then I cut it into widths of maybe 16, 20 inches and roll them up. So I have that 1.25 yards, so I have 45 inches, and then I have it a little wider than a table runner, and I have just a bunch of these rolls on my shelf. And so when I'm in the mood to finish a table runner, I can just grab one of these, and that's a really easy thing. I'm not getting out this huge thing. The other thing I do is when I send quilts off to the long arm, she always sends back all the leftover batting, and rather than just folding it up and chucking it on the shelf, before I chuck it on the shelf, I'll cut it about 40, 45 inches long and roll it up, just tie it with a little scrap of fabric, and then I've got these little rolls of batting that are just ready, and I can grab a couple fat quarters or a 1/2 yard off the shelf for the backing, and I'm good to go. And you'll notice, because I like to be lazy and do things easier, most of the table runners that, for patterns that I do, I try and keep the length of the runner under 42 inches so that a 1/2 yard will just do the whole length of the runner. If there's one that's longer, I'll call for 5/8 of a yard, so that's 22.5 inches, and you can sew those, cut it in half at the fold, and sew those 2 pieces together, and that gives you about 44 or 45 inches, and that does most table runners unless you have a really long table. And then, of course, you'll have to work with that. But it's kind of fun to put something surprising on the back, and then on the other hand, sometimes I'll put just something that I have on the back. So anyway, let's get off to the next subject here, and that is how I attach my layers together. And let me switch cameras here so that you can see. I've got my backing. I pressed it. It's all nice and crisp and flat. And before I do any basting of any kind, I like to steam my layers together. And so I'm going to just put my batting on top and put my runner on top, and I will line up with the top and the side edges, and then all the extra goes off those other 2 edges. Now, I don't have my iron on, but if I was doing this, I would steam it, not press it, but steam it. And what that does is it kind of connects the layers together, it flattens things out, and that makes it so that it stays together better. Then I'm going to spray baste my layers together. And those of you that have been playing the Hen and Chicks Bingo, one of the questions on there was, what tool has changed your life? And I think spray baste has totally changed mine. And I know I can I can use safety pins, I can use straight pins, but my very favorite is always to use spray base. So now I've kind of pressed these layers together so they're all stuck. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just fold back the top 2 layers. And then here's my, I forgot to show you this. This is the one that I have is 505. And it doesn't smell. You can do it outside just on your driveway or on a sidewalk, or when we're camping, I just go right outside the camper and do it right in the driveway. When we're at home, I'll go outside in the backyard. I know my neighbors are wondering, what the heck is she doing out here all the time? Anyway, this is just like using spray paint, where you're better off with 2 lightweight layers than you are with 1 really heavy layer. So now I've sprayed it just gently, and I put my batting down and patted my batting. I'm going to test it. When I lift the corner up, the back is sticking, so I have enough. And if it came up without sticking to the back, I'd spray another really lightweight layer on. Now I'm going to spray the batting, and then I'm going to put my table runner over. And now, before I pat this down, I like to take a ruler and check how square are the corners. And now is the time where you can kind of bunch it around and move it a little bit and just double check that it's square and you've got it going where you want. Sometimes they are a little bit off, and you can kind of press them into place and get them exactly how you want. Okay, Kirk's waving at me. He says,
"You ever use a fusible batting?"
I have used fusible batting, and the thing that I like about having the spray is I always have batting and I always have the spray. The fusible batting, I have to go out and buy some because I don't normally have that. So the fusible batting does work well.
Does the spray base get your needles sticky?
The spray base, if you were doing a whole quilt, might get your needle a little bit sticky, but for a table runner, I haven't had any trouble with that. And we'll talk about what kind of needles to use when we get to the needle part. And there is a non-stick needle that you can use if you're worried about that. But usually on a table runner, it's a small enough project that you don't have to worry about that. Okay, now I've folded back the 2 layers again, and you can see right here it's kind of sticking. That's as far as we've gotten. I sprayed a little bit on. I'm going to just lower this down. Again, I'm patting it, and now I'm lifting, and the backing comes up with it, so I've got enough on. You really don't need much. And now I'm going to spray the batting, do my last little bit, and we'll pat that down. Let's remember to check if it's square. Yep, this one, the mini brick road is what we're working on here. And this one usually is pretty straight because your seams are going this way and this way. Sometimes when you have diagonal seams, things will get a little bit off kilter. Okay, so now I'm ready to sew. And before I actually go and sew, I would take a scissors or a rotary cutter and just trim. I want to have about a 1/2 inch extra. You don't want to have a whole lot extra because if you're going to start stitching here, you have to go all the way across that to get to the runner. You just want to have a little bit extra so that you can trim it up and square it up later. Okay, someone's asking, Linda's asking, when your back is pieced, how do you make sure the seams are straight? You can check on the edge, and I didn't remember to tell you that, but I had already cut this so that I knew that this seam, I'm sliding this down, I've got a seam there, and it comes across here. I don't worry that it's exactly straight. What I worry about is I try and get this seam underneath somewhere so it's not doubling up with a seam that's already on top. Okay, someone has a large box to catch the overspray. That's a great idea. And being that we are shipping patterns and stuff all the time, I have out in the garage a great big flat cardboard box that I can go in the garage. But there's a door to the outside of my sewing room, and that's always easier for me. All right, so we have done this. If I didn't have spray based and I was going to just pin my runner together, I'm looking under here. What's under here? I have a cutting mat. And if I was going to pin this, I'm putting a cutting mat underneath because it makes it easier to get the pins. And if I was going to pin this with pins, I would stop and think about where am I going to quilt. Let's say I was just going to go along these lengthwise lines. Then I would put my pins in the middle where I'm not sewing. It's also possible for table runners, especially because they're small. It's always easy if you don't have any spray base to use straight pins. And what I do with straight pins is I think about, okay, let's say I'm going to do all these lines. I will pin those lines with straight pins going like that so that when I'm stitching, I'm coming to where it's easy to pull that straight pin out. And that is not my favorite option, but if I didn't have spray base, I might wait till the next day and run into the quilt shop.
Fusible powder.
Okay, I'm going to go back up here. Someone's asking about fusible powder. I have not tried that. I actually got a sample of that at Quilt Market one time, and I haven't gotten around to trying it. I've heard good things about it, but I have the spray base, and that's what I usually use. So maybe some of the others that are watching that have tried the powder could comment and give an opinion for that. That would be kind of a good thing. Okay, so now we've gotten our table runner ready. We got the backing ready. We put some batting in. Oh, and with the batting, plan ahead. If you have a lot of white background in your runner, definitely use white batting so your seams don't show. And use a flat batting, 100% cotton or the 80-20, so it's mostly cotton, and that's going to give you much flatter, better results. So we got the backing, the batting, and we've basted our layers together. Now we've got to get the machine ready. And so what we're going to do to get our machine ready is, first of all, is everybody's least favorite job, and that is cleaning your machine and oiling your machine. And everybody always says, well, you should clean your machine every time you do a project. And I never get around to doing it before the project because when you got a project, you just got to start sewing. But when it's time to do the quilting, I definitely will take I have my little, see if I can get this in the camera. Where's the camera? There it is. I have just a little, like a little paintbrush, and I'll brush out all the dust and I'll oil it because you won't get any little clumps of lint coming up and sticking to the back of your runner, and it also sounds better and definitely quieter and smoother running. So that's my logic on when I clean and oil my machine, is right before I'm going to do quilting. So that works for me. Okay.
Press the seam open or closed on the backing.
You can press it open, but it's faster to press it to the side, so I always just press it to the side. And as long as you're not layering up that seam with other seams, it doesn't make any difference because all your seams on the front are probably pressed to the side. It's not going to add extra bulk as long as it's not right underneath another seam. So that's for that. Okay. So now we have cleaned and oiled our machine, and next we need to change the needle. And I'm always sewing when I'm on the phone. And when I'm on the phone with my non-sewing friends, we'll be talking, and then they'll go, "Are you sewing? Do I hear a sewing machine?" And it's like, yeah, I'm sewing. And when I'm on the phone with a quilting friend, there was this one time I was on the phone with my friend Liz, and she's sewing and I'm sewing, and all of a sudden she goes, "Terry, you need to change your needle." It's like, it was so loud she could hear it, but I hadn't changed my needle. So I did, and it was much quieter. So I'm suggesting that to you now so your friends don't have to do an intervention and tell you to do that. So change your needle, put a fresh needle in. I usually have the Schmetz Microtex needles, and for my logic on my sewing machine is if it's working, I'm not going to worry about it. So I don't often change the needle for something special. I usually have 10s, 11s, and 12s. So the 70-10, and the 80-12s or 75, those. And so those sizes are the ones that I always have in the machine, and that works for quilting or piecing. If we talked earlier, if you're worried about it getting sticky with the spray based or the fusible batting, you can put that non-stick needle in. I've tried that, and I haven't ever had a problem with it sticking, so I didn't notice anything different. I think if you spray more on than you need, you might notice and need that. And there is actually a special needle that is for quilting. It's got a pointier point so that it will go through all the layers. And I've tried those, and again, I'm happy with whatever needle I have. And it's interesting because I used to be more picky about, what am I going to use for what? But these past few years, not this year, but a couple years before that, we've been traveling in our camper. And I have found that, whatever's in the camper is what I'm going to use. And I've been happy with the results, and it's worked pretty well. Okay, so that's your needle and cleaning and oiling your machine. Now the other thing that's important is, I'm going to grab this table runner and show you what color thread should you use. If you have a table runner like this and you have white and navy and red and blue, what on earth are you going to pick for your thread color? Now, I want to ask you, do you remember what color thread I had on that runner? I just held it up. You really can't remember. What you noticed was the texture. There were straight lines on it, and it had a great texture. And so that's the thing to keep in mind when you're picking your thread color is it doesn't really matter. Just pick something that blends. So let's switch over here, and I've got my Christmas runner, and I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit, and let's try some different colored threads. Okay. Let's do the off-white because there's off-white in the runner. We'll put that across. That kind of blends. And it's a darker off-white than the actual fabric. And then I've got white, which is a whiter white than the fabric. And we'll put that one across. And then there's a little bit of teal in here. So let's try a teal thread. Oops. I always try and get my thread when I'm testing. This is kind of auditioning the thread. If I have a white thread, I'm looking at how does it blend in with the darker colors. And if I have a teal thread, clearly it's going to blend in with the teal, but how does it look on the white and how does it look on the red? That's kind of what I'm looking for. And so here's another one. This one is a pale gray, and there's no pale gray in here, but that one blends in nicely too. Okay, by looking at these, the correct answer is it doesn't matter which thread we use. All of them would work well. And it's one of those things where I can spend an hour deciding, which thread should I use. I'll go upstairs and get Kirk and say, come down and give me your opinion. And I waffle around, and then I get started, and I realize when I'm done, it really doesn't matter what color you use. This table runner that I showed you a few minutes ago, I didn't have navy thread. I didn't have a good red, so I used gray. I tried the white on here, and I thought, oh, that's too much. I didn't like it. And I always just audition all different colors and see what's going to look good and what's going to blend in. And I was surprised that I didn't have to use a blue on this. A gray is the one that worked the best. So definitely try all your colors. The threads that I normally have, let's see if I can, this backwards where I look at the camera and it goes the opposite way of what I think. I usually have Metler thread and Aurifil thread. And I like the Aurifil for quilting. I like it for piecing too because it's a real lightweight thread. And it's thinner and it doesn't show as much. And what I have found is an Aurifil thread that doesn't match sometimes blends in better than a regular thread that does match. So keep an open mind and try your different threads. Okay, we've got a couple comments here. Marilyn likes to puddle the thread. That's a good idea, where you can see more thread like that. And go-to when you're in doubt is gray. The other thing to think about is, what are your colors? Clearly, these are my colors. And to me, this little teal is a neutral that goes with everything. Some of you may never sew with turquoise or teal, and a dark gray might be your neutral because you sew with darker or brighter colors. So definitely don't worry about it. I had years ago, I had a quilt that was mostly green, kind of that 30s green. I'll go back up here. You don't need to watch my hands because I don't hold still very well. Anyway, I had a quilt that was mostly green, and I was dropping it off at the Long Armor, and she goes, "What color thread do you want?" And I said, "I don't have any idea." So surprisingly, she got a bunch of different threads out, and the thread that blended in best was lavender. And ever since then, I've tried to have a more open mind because I would never have even tried the lavender on green. But, you know, lavender's kind of gray, and it kind of blends in. So definitely experiment and see what color that you like. All right, so we have gotten our machine ready now. We got, it's all cleaned and oiled, and we've got a fresh needle in there. The other thing that you need is a bobbin. And the thing that I like best about quilting table runners, it doesn't seem to matter what I quilt on them, one bobbin is enough. So I don't usually have trouble running out a bobbin in the middle of my project because I start with a full bobbin, and that usually is enough for a table runner. I also try to have the bobbin thread and the top thread the same color or similar. If you have good tension, where those threads meet and cross each other is going to be in the middle in the batting. But depending if you're changing speed, sometimes the little dots from the bottom will show up. And if they match your top thread, you won't even see it. So I know it's nice to have a wild back, and I don't worry about the thread on the back. I worry about the thread on the front, and then I'll wind a bobbin to match that thread. And that's good to go. Okay. Now, let's see, we've done our machine needle, we cleaned and oiled our machine, we've got a fresh bobbin in there, we're ready to sew. And the next step is absolutely the most important step, and that is to think about it. What am I going to do? How do I want to quilt it? Do I want to get done really fast? Do I want to take my time and do something really cool? What's it going to be? And so to me, the thinking about it, it's kind of like planning a quilt. That's a fun part for me. And I will experiment and draw out some different designs and see what I want to do and just kind of think about it and experiment. So, all right, I'm going to go zoom back out and we'll look back again at this quilt. And some of you that know me know that I love to draw and doodle, and I will take a piece of plastic. This is a piece of template plastic, and also that 12 gauge vinyl works. That's the same weight vinyl that we used in our Bridget's Baguettes pattern. You just need something clear that you can draw on and erase. And for an eraser, I just use a piece of batting. And for drawing, I'm going to get a blue. I use these dry erase markers. So they have those at the office supply store, and they come in colors. Who wouldn't like that? More markers and colors. And so you can draw on your plastic, and then you can erase it. And if it doesn't want to erase, and your batting isn't erasing it, you can get some baby wipes, and we'll just grab a baby wipe out of here, and that will erase it for you. So either the batting or the baby wipes. And notice that I have painter's tape around the edge. And the reason for that is because it's clear and you don't want to drive off the edge with your marker and mark your quilt. So that is what I like to have on the edge. So now it's my time to think about this, and I can experiment and see what I want to do. I usually like to do something freehand, whether I'm using my walking foot or my darning foot. So if I was doing my walking foot, I would do, you could do lines all in a row. You could do diagonal lines. You could do wavy lines. There's all sorts of possibilities. One of the things, I need this wipe. One of the things that's fun for this mini brick road pattern is, because it's busy and you want to have just a texture, it's the perfect place to practice your machine quilting. And people are always worried, oh, I don't want to use my darning foot. I haven't practiced and I don't know how it is. And just remember, when you're making a table runner, it's probably seasonal and you're going to have it out for a couple weeks or a month, and then you're going to move on to the next season. So it's something that's very temporary. So you can just practice and see it, and then you don't have to worry about it. Now, if I was doing my darning foot, one of the things I like to do is just make squares. And my first row, I'm going along a seam, because that helps me choose my, so I stay straight and don't go all diagonal. My next row, I'm going to do these same squares, but I'm going to start out parallel and come over here. Okay, and then I'll do this one. So what we're ending up with is kind of a brick pattern, and all we're really doing is drawing squares, and we all can draw squares. And it's something, when you have lots of fabrics on your table runner, these don't have to be perfectly square. They can be random, because what you're going to notice again is the texture, not the, oh, there, I need my wiper.
Plastic.
What?
The plastic.
This plastic is a template plastic, and it's the kind of plastic you would buy to make templates if you were going to do applique. And so it's just a bigger than normal piece that I found when we were traveling. So any plastic that you can dry erase on is going to work really well. Okay, now let's go back to this quilt. This one is our Cha-Cha-Cha runner, and that is one where you can see I've done lines. And again, it is just going straight. And there are seams here along this edge, but when we get to the middle, you're not doing a seam. You're going kind of right down, smack dab down the middle of the shape. And that is something that I like to do, is kind of follow the seams in the pattern and get going with that. Okay, let's see what else we can do for more ideas. With the walking foot, a really easy one to do is in the ditch. And it seems like when you're first starting, what you want to do is you want your quilting on there so it's not going to show. And when you get more confident, you'll say, oh, I'm going to drive everywhere with my machine. This is one that is quilted in the ditch along just these seams. And that's one of the things to think about, is you don't need a whole ton of quilting in order for it to be really pleasing. And so let's see, over here, I'm going to zoom in so you can see. Get this. Okay, you can't see the in the ditch quilting because it's going in the ditch and I'm going next to the seam. And it's called in the ditch because the seams are pressed one way and your stitching is on the side that doesn't have seam allowance in. And I'm going to sneak this up a little closer to the camera so you can see. The only time it really shows is like right here. I went crooked and drove over the part that did have a seam allowance. And really, you have to really look even to see that I went crooked. And this is another one of those where I have all these colors in here, and I have white in here, and I used a gray thread. And so it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't totally show. Okay, now I'm looking for another quilt. I don't know what order I have these in. Okay. Here's another one where I'm doing on this one a kind of a faux quilt as you go. So it's kind of, I'm stitching on the back and flipping it over. When you're doing quilt as you go, a lot of you follow Gudrun from GE Designs, and she has a lot of great quilt as you go patterns. When you have one that has seams that you want to match, you don't really want to lay that piece on and go over that with your walking foot and hope that it matches. What I do is I sew all the seams first, and then I just go back and we want to just attach it to the backing. So I will pin this seam and just stitch right next to the seam. And when I'm stitching right next to the seam, I'm going through all the layers, and then I'll flip this back over and press it. Then I'll open it to the next seam and I'll stitch that down and flip it back over. And I'll work starting in the middle and work out to the edges. And so if you're going to do this kind of thing, nothing that you stitch is going to show because it's all inside. And that's kind of a fast little one. The other thing is plan ahead. I like to start in the middle and work my way to the edges. So I would press half my seams that way and half my seams that way. So I could start here and then work my way out towards the edges. Okay, so that is a really easy way. And if you look at this table runner, you can't tell which ones I did that faux quilt as you go underneath and which seams I did the quilting in the ditch. And now a question on how do you stay close to the ditch. I have a blind hem foot, which I have tried to use because it has a ridge to help you stay next to the ditch. And I didn't like that as well. I just used my walking foot. And I will line up my walking foot. So part of the walking foot's going along that seam. And then I move my needle over so that it's hitting where I want it to go. So I don't have to worry as much because it's helping me because I move the needle into the position that works well for in the ditch. Okay, so now let's take a look. Here is our Desert Stars pattern. And this one has lines that I've quilted lines. If you look closely, you'll see that these lines are not perfectly straight. And that's a personality thing. I know when I've taught classes, there sometimes are people who have all their pieces stacked and labeled, and then there's people in class who just throw everything in a pile and grab from the pile. And I kind of belong in that second group where I kind of do things randomly. And so what I did first on this one, I'm going to turn this so I don't drive over the edge, is the first thing I did is I went down the whole table runner, whoops, and I stitched in the ditch along these seams. Okay, and so that fixed and divided the space, and let's see, there's a seam here for the edge where the blocks go together, and there's a seam here. So I stitched in the ditch. Then what I like to do is I like to just divide the space. And so a real obvious place to divide the space is right here in the middle. So then I did a row here going down the middle. And now this space, it's about that wide, and this other one is wider. So I did a row of stitching kind of right by the points and divided that. And now these three spaces are about the same. And all I have to do is drive down the middle, and then I've got two equal spaces. Then I divide those in half. And if you like kind of a little bit random, this is a great way to do it, where you're just dividing your space, divide that space in half, and then we'll go here and here. If you are a person that these slightly crooked lines drive you nuts, then you're going to do one of two things. You can mark lines on here with chalk, or you can use the side of your presser foot as a guide and have like a certain distance that you're just going to use that presser foot and ignore any of the pieces on the pattern. So that works really well. Another way that I like to quilt this one, I'm going to dry that off. Because these stars sometimes, if you have a really dark border or a really high contrast, you maybe don't want to use all the same color thread. And this is a really good one for putting your darning foot on and doing some freehand quilting. You can take white thread and just go around here. And this is one of those things that you can practice with your hand and it gets into your brain. When I'm doing meandering like this, I kind of always back myself into a corner. And so for me, I like doing loops because it seems like those, when you get stuck, you can just do a little twirl and move on. And out on the border, you can try, you know, all of you have done handwriting and you can write your name. So you know that you can do loops. And those are easy, and it's something that translates really well to machine quilting. Well, Kirk is saying there's a question.
Do you sew in the same direction with each line or alternate back and forth?
No, always the same direction. And the reason for that is your walking foot is helping you walk, but if you're going in opposite directions, you kind of can get an opposite thing going and you get little puckers in there. So I will work my way across the whole quilt where I divide it and I'm doing the lines at the seams. So I've got all these lines, and then I'll go through and fill in between, and I roll it up, and so it goes underneath the arm of the machine, and I can just unroll it and work. When I want to go and do over here, there's just more rolled up, so I'm always starting at the same end and working down. But I do start in the middle and divide that space first so that everything is kind of anchored down before I go. Okay, now back to our darning foot. We talked about these loops are real easy. And one of the easiest things for a first time is do a loop facing that way and a loop facing this way. And just keep switching your direction. And that's a really fast, easy way to fill in on your borders. And now I've lost my wiper. Okay. So those are a couple options for freehand with a darning foot. Another option is to do circles. There's two ways you can do a circle where you're going in and you kind of come out, kind of like a little snail. Or you can do circles and just go to the next one. And I like that because you can just, whenever you get to the middle, just drive across and go to the next circle. And that's another easy one with the walking.
Free motion quilting is like dancing.
Yes, free motion quilting is like dancing. Except you don't need a partner. You can go wherever you want. Nobody is going to lead you. You just get to go on your own way. Okay, now I'm going to try and work through some of these different patterns. Here we have another one. This is our Let's Play Hearts pattern. And same thing. I'm going to turn it this way. Same thing as I can't possibly use blue. It doesn't match. Let's get a red pen. I did the seams. Okay, we got a seam there. We got a seam there. And then I decided, like if I go right down the middle, can I divide that space? And this is one of those things where there's not a right or wrong answer. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to slide that down so you can see. And when I'm working like this, I can say, okay, like if I did the middle and then I did two, how wide is that? Like if I had my walking foot on, if I set my walking foot, like let's say this is my walking foot, I'd have a little space next to it. And so if I set my walking foot next to this line, I could put my needle over to the left and that might give me a distance that I want. So that's the advantage to experimenting on here, is you can put your walking foot on and see how does that translate to my walking foot. The other thing you can do is when you have a space like this, and it's not easy to just drive down the middle here. So maybe you want to do all the seams, and then you want to go and you want to mark that one line and give yourself a guide for that. So you can kind of experiment a little bit with that. And now this one's interesting because the red and blue one, I did a darker thread that went more with the border, and then it showed up more on the white. This one, I did kind of a lighter thread, and you would be surprised to know that this is the thread that I used. It's a light gray, and that seemed to blend on the whites and the reds better than any of the other colors. And I would have thought something totally different, so I'm glad that I took the time to check all the colors. All right, let's see what's next on the stack. Okay, here's our cha-cha-cha runner again, and this is another easy thing to do, and that is to do a little bit of a wavy line. And let me get this out of the way. Okay, so this time, instead of going along a seam, because it's crooked, it's not straight, we're doing wavy. What I did first on this one is, the seam is here, I did a wavy line to the left of the seam, and I did a wavy line to the right of the seam. So I just got that, and again, I went across the whole table runner and anchored by each seam. And then I did the thing where I divide the space into smaller sections. And with wavy lines, when you're sewing, your hands are going to be next to here. And I put my hands under the edge of the quilt, and I move the whole quilt like this. I'm not pushing like this when I'm doing wavy lines. I just take the quilt, and as I'm sewing, I just hold the whole quilt and go like this, and then the machine goes wavy for me, and it works really well. It seems like when you're doing wavy lines, they can all tend to look the same. So, you know, you end up and you have like a wave, and then you're either going opposite or you're going parallel, and it's hard to make them random. What I do is, let's just erase this and I'll show you something. That's the best part, is just starting over. Okay, so you'll do a wavy line, and then you'll do your other wavy line. Okay, see how they kind of are going to go opposite or parallel, and it kind of is harder to be wavy. So what I like to do is I'll do one wavy line where the waves are little, and then on my next wavy line, I'll make longer waves. And then they don't line up and get exactly, so then I'll go small, big, and I'll adjust the size of the wave, and that helps them look a little bit more random. And this is like handwriting, where some of you are going to go totally wavy and make it be really noticeably wavy, and others of you will just kind of do a little slight wave. And I've noticed when I do this from one table runner to the next, it's never the same. Okay, and a question from Linda, how do you stay straight? And I am always working from those seams. So I go by that first seam. See, I think the blue shows up a little better. I did my wavy lines to the edge of the seam. And then I have this space in here, and it doesn't matter if I go crooked, because I can't go that crooked because I've got boundaries. And so that's how I keep it going straight, is I stay within those boundaries. And I always start by using the seams as my first rows are going along a seam. All right, and again, this one, white thread. Well, not white, kind of off-white. And that goes with both the colors. Alrighty, so here's another one. This is our cha-cha-cha runner again. And this one, I I didn't mark these waves. I just did them. And so the one thing that I did mark, I'm looking for my turquoise marker. Is it over by you, Kirk? Nope, it's right here. I put it in upside down. Okay, this is a friction pen, and I use, if I have dark fabrics, I'll use one of those rolling chalk markers to make a little chalk mark. And if I have kind of medium or lighter fabrics, I use a friction pen because those will erase with heat. So what I did on this is I just went over to the edge. We're using these seams as a guide. So I went over to the edge and I marked where it's going to be in the seam allowance. I just marked where all those seams are. Then I had a guide to start, and then I can go. So I did a wavy line starting at the seam. I made a little hump that way, then a little hump that way. So I just, and it's a real smooth going along. Then I did the same thing on the next seam. So I'm going around. Now when we get in here, there's no seam here, but we know we're connecting up to that seam. So we just go like that, and same thing where I'm using these corners kind of as my guide. And I did the middle, and I did the middle here. And this is time now to say, is this enough quilting? Do I want to be done? Or do I want to continue to add more? And that, it doesn't matter. You can do it however you want. If you want to add more, you can go in between. Maybe you want to only go in between the other one.
What is a friction pen?
A friction pen is a brand of pens. Where'd it go? It is a brand of pens that it erases with heat. So when I'm finished, I would just steam this with the iron and those marks would go away. So
Do you use stitches pre-programmed for quilting and not on your sewing machine?
I don't have any stitches pre-programmed. I have an old Bernina that I've had for 25 years. And I will either do just a straight stitch. Oh, and we didn't talk about stitch length. That's a good thing you're getting me going on this. I use, let's go back up here so you don't have to watch my hands going. I use a stitch length of 3. And you don't want, usually when you're piecing, you'll go 2, 2.5, 2 if it's something you know, 2.5 if you think you might be ripping. That's my plan for piecing. Anyway, for quilting, I'll go 3 or maybe even 3.5, depending how fast I want to get done. But you want a little bit longer stitch length, otherwise it just gets wavy and bunchy. So you want to allow room for all the batting. So you're using a little bit longer stitch length. And when you're machine quilting, if you're using the walking foot, your machine is going to dry for you. And you will notice when you try and help it is when the stitch length gets weird and it gets shorter or longer. So if you are just putting your hands on and you're kind of guiding it which way you want it to go, it's going to be a really nice stitch length. If you try and help it or push it or turn it too much, that's when you're going to get your different stitch length. And when you're working on a quilt and you're stitching and you go down, let's say you were going along here, when you get to crossing a seam, and if it's a thick intersection, you're walking, the little feet on your walking foot kind of get caught up in that. And your instinct is to push it through. And that makes kind of a weird stitch length. What you should do when you feel like it's kind of getting stuck is just lift your presser foot and set it back down. And then it will continue going. You might need to do that a couple times. It'll continue going with a more even, good stitch length. For the darning foot, where you're doing things freehand, you drop your feed dogs, and how fast you move the quilt is will make the stitch length for you. So what I like to do on that is I'll set my machine at a certain speed. So that would be pedal to the metal for me. But pick a speed on your machine and then have the machine always be going at the same speed and then adjust your hands to go with the machine. So you're not trying to do the foot pedal and the hands at the same time, because that's a little bit harder. So anyway, that is our stitch length. Okay, the other thing I didn't remember to tell you is definitely practice on a scrap. I take leftover pieces and my batting and just some random piece of fabric I have for the back. Now that I see this, I kind of wish, I think I saved a piece of it. I like it. Anyway, test your seams. This is one that I did. I'm going to hold it up to the camera. I was testing random lines, and what I was testing on this one is if I ran with my walking foot right next to the previous line, what would happen if I moved my needle over? And what I found I didn't like is the really close together ones. I thought that's going to take 100 years. So that's where I was experimenting with this to see how far apart I want to have my lines, and testing my stitch length and just seeing that the tension and everything is good. So definitely practice a little bit, and you know, you can practice on just a little 4-inch square. You don't have to do like a giant practice.
Needle loose even using walking foot. Any suggestions?
Keep a little screwdriver and tighten it, because that's your machine. You could ask your sewing machine dealer if there's something that you can do with that. My old machine that I had a long time ago used to do that, and I just kept tightening it because the vibration would wiggle it, and that never did get fixed. It just, I always knew it, so I kept doing it. So okay, now let's get back. We were talking about these wavy lines, and we did all the wavy lines there. Let's see if I turn this over. Oh, it's right here. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of those wavy lines, and I'm going to show you another one that I've done, same quilt pattern, but I've done different wavy lines, and that's this one. And it's one where I wanted to do a little more quilting. So I started out the same. I think I need another color marker. So I'm like a small child. I got to have all different color markers. Okay, so I did the same thing where I went like that and did my waves. So I'm looking at this. So when I'm sewing, I start here and I look here. And it's like, okay, I got to get over there. And same thing here. Start here. Have to get there. And always plan ahead. Where are you going to rearrange your hands? Because you always have to move your hands. And always plan ahead to see where you're going to stop and kind of adjust your hands. So now here's wavy again. And now, instead of going in between, like we talked about last time, going in between, I just did an opposite one. So I've got these little, almost like a figure 8 kind of thing going. And that's something that's real easy if you have a pattern like the cha-cha-cha here, where you have seams where you can stop and look and see how that is. And again, this one has I think I actually used cream thread on this, and you don't really see it on the blue or the red. It blends in really well. Okay. Here's another one. This is our Let's Play Hearts pattern. And this one you can see, oh, I've lost my plastic. Okay, let's get rid of these lines. And you can see that I started this one. I just did wavy lines along the seam and a wavy line along this seam. So again, same thing, totally different pattern. I'm dividing it into spaces. And then I went wavy down the middle, and then wavy down the middle. And then again, notice how these are all kind of long. Then I'm going to go in here and go a little shorter, and that's going to give it a little bit more visual interest. Okay, so that's easy. And this was easy for choosing a color, because these are all very light fabrics. And again, on the back, I have 2 fat quarters that somehow never got used, but they're perfect with these fabrics, and I've got a good back on that. And this one is our Let's Play Hearts. And here's another Let's Play Hearts. And this is another one of my favorite things to do on any pattern, is to just look at what shapes are in there. And rather than going with these seams, on this one, I went with the other seams, the diagonal seams. I don't know if I even need to draw this for you because it's pretty easy to see what I did. And that is my first line. I went like this, stitched in the ditch and went along there. And then I just used my walking foot. I moved my needle way over to the one side and just went and stitched, got up to here, down to there. And when I got to that seam is when I turned the corner. When I got up here, I didn't know where to turn the corner, so I had to just take a straight edge, and I didn't mark a whole line. I just marked little dots and just about where I thought, so just so I could see where to turn the corner. And this is one of those projects that I love the fabrics in it, and I was all excited by it. And I worked a little bit, and I got about this much done, and my lines got kind of crooked. And I set it aside because I thought, oh, this looks terrible. And the thing that's interesting is when I finished it, those crooked lines are still there, but again, you don't see them, you only see the texture. Okay, how much quilting should be done on a runner? No, the quilting to be done on a runner depends on how much you feel like doing. And I'm fishing out this one. This one is probably as little as I would do, where these are only along those seams. There's not a whole lot of quilting, and that is just as nice as this. The thing that you want to keep in mind is you want to have even quilting. So if you have a lot of quilting, you don't get to say, oh, I'm tired of this, I won't do much on the rest, because then it won't lay flat. You either have to do a lot or a medium amount or hardly any. And as long as it's even across the whole runner, it's going to turn out really well.
Spray basting front and back, batting only.
I spray basted all the layers. When I did it, I'm looking for my little sample, which is falling on the floor. Okay, when I did it, I pulled back and sprayed under the batting, and then I laid the batting down. And then I sprayed on top of the batting and laid the batting down. And it doesn't matter whether you spray the fabric or the batting, because it's all going to stick to each other anyway. But you're getting it on both sides of the batting, but I do it where I flip it over. I don't like to flip the whole thing over to do it, because then you're laying your runner face down where there might be overspray. So,
do you use guide bars on your walking foot to keep the spacing even?
I have a guide bar, and it frustrates me, so I don't use it. But I have used it, and it works really well. I have the attention span where I want to kind of get done, and to me, I would rather have a random texture, because then if you go a little crooked, it doesn't show. If you have a perfect texture where you're going exactly a certain amount, if you go a little crooked, then you do notice it. So because I'm not a real patient person, I like to just drive fast and do the random thing. And if you're the kind of person that you like things to be exact, those guide bars are great, and they work really well. Okay. Any more questions, Kirk?
Somebody again about that powdered adhesive.
Oh, the powdered adhesive, I haven't tried that. I have it, but I haven't tried it. Okay, someone's liking the bindings. Yeah, it's interesting to me. I have to show you one of the bindings I did. When I was working on this cha-cha-cha pattern, these are just scraps that I had. So the whole thing was very scrappy, random. I got done, and I wanted the binding to match. And let me put this real close. I ended up finding another fabric, and this is the back side of the other fabric that kind of went with this fabric, and then you don't see the binding. I love when the binding matches because you can sew faster, and I love when it contrasts because it makes a nice frame. So both ways work really well. Okay, couple more show and tells, and then we'll talk about binding. This is our cha-cha-cha pattern again, and this is another way of using the grid that your pattern has in it. And we have these corners here, and so you can think about, let me slide these over this way. Okay, so you've got the corners of this square, and if you make an X, that works really well. And if you continue that X, these are all X's here, and then when you go into this block, you get diamonds. But when you're quilting with your walking foot, you don't really want to keep turning it that much. So what you're going to do is you're going to go from corner to corner here to here. So you're actually drawing diagonal lines, and you're going to go down and do your grid like that. Good thing I don't sew is, oh, I have the wrong camera up, so how do you even know what I'm doing? Okay, so we're drawing from this corner to this corner, and then we're going every other one. So we're going like that, and we're getting a diagonal grid. And we're going along, and then we're going the other. This is exactly like a square grid would be, except we're using the corners of our pattern to get that going. One thing when you're doing anything diagonal with this heart one and with the diagonals on this one is you're going to be sewing with your quilt going into the machine like this. So when I did these diagonal lines, I was actually sewing going down toward me like that. And so in that case, I set up a little table behind my machine, because the other thing that'll happen is if it falls off, it kind of will pull, the weight of it will pull and affect your stitch length. So I would actually roll this one up diagonally so that I can go through the machine like that. So that is a little more challenging than just doing either lengthwise or crosswise. And one of the reasons I stopped halfway through this is I was tired of turning all these corners. And I'm glad I finished it because I love it. It's one of my favorites.
Special gloves to help with quilting or dropping the feed dogs?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me about the gloves. Here they are. I have them so I can show you. I have a purple pair, and these are my white ones. They have little rubber fingers on the edge. And I have another pair that has little dots all over so that you can put your hands down and kind of grip the quilt. And that is, let's see if I can get, there, now I'm back. These gloves work really great. And I use the gloves whether I'm using the darning foot or the walking foot, because it just helps me handle the quilt better, and I don't have to use as many muscles, and so I don't get tired shoulders, because I can just use less pressure and just guide that quilt through. And with the gloves on, it just helps you guide. I'm so glad someone asked that, because I totally forgot to mention it. So, okay, let's switch back to this other one. And I've got a couple more. This is the one that I showed you to do those bricks on the other yellow brick road, where we went and did, I'm going to start over here, went down and made a square like that. And you can see when the whole quilt is finished, you just get a nice texture, and it doesn't make any difference whether your lines are a little wonky or not, and it gives it just a great texture. And here's one other one, and I've got to erase for this one. What? Am I on the right side? Nope. There. Okay. Okay, notice on here I have an X on my little tape, and that X is supposed to tell me that this side goes up. And clearly I'm not looking for it. Okay. On this one, I'm looking underneath here, I just did random, you know how we talked about doing loops like that? I tried something new for me on this one, and I just did kind of squarish loops like that. And that was kind of a fun, different thing. And again, you don't see the pattern too much, you see the texture. And so I kept kind of my little loopy things a similar size as I went across. And that's one of those things that I'll use my hand for, and think if it's more than 2 fingers across, like here's an example, that's about 1 finger across. If it's getting to be more than 2 fingers across, I need to go back and make it a little bit smaller. And I always have some guide that I'm thinking size-wise so that I can keep it even from one side of the quilt to the other, because the tendency that I have is to want to get done, and so then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I always have some kind of a little guide, and usually I'll use my fingers, or I'll use some sort of seam on the pattern so that I can keep that quilting even. All right, so we've got our table runner all quilted. I'm going to grab my little binding samples. We had a couple of questions about binding, and let me show you. If I was sewing my binding, I would sew about this far, and then I would stop and wrap my binding around and see, does that reach where I want it to reach? And the reason I test it, and I do this every time I bind any table runner or quilt, is you might have the same brand of batting, and you might think, oh, it's going to always be the same, but sometimes it isn't. Depends on the thickness of your fabric and which roll your batting came off of, what the thickness is. So do a little bit and then stop and wrap it around and say, yep, that's how much I want, and then you can keep going. Then we'll come down here. I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch before the corner and back stitch. And let's see, Kirk, can you bring me some pins? They're over by the window. Then I'm going to stop, take it out of the machine, and turn it. And then I'm folding my binding up. Thank you. And that raw edge needs to be straight. And the most important thing on binding is this diagonal needs to point directly at your corner, and then your binding is going to be perfect. Then I'll hold that little crease in place and fold this down. I'll start right at the edge and drive, stopping again a 1/4 inch before the next corner. And when I'm driving and I get about here, I'll look under here and I'll put a pin in so that I know I'm going to the pin, and that's where I'm going to backstitch so that I get it a 1/4 inch away. If you go too far, then you get kind of a lumpy corner. So that's easy. I'm going here, backstitching, turning it, and this raw edge needs to be straight, and my pleat needs to point towards the corner. So that's how we all do our square corners. And now if you have a corner that's not square, a lot of table runners have a pointy end, and you have this corner that's not square. Again, same exact thing. We're driving along here. I'm going to look under here and kind of put my pin in so that I know where my 1/4 inch is. I'm guesstimating. It's better to be a few stitches short than it is to go too far. So I'm stitching to the pin and back stitching. I'll take it out of the machine, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm folding this up so that my raw edges are straight. My diagonal here needs to point, my fold needs to point right to that corner.
How wide are your binding strips?
Okay, for a table runner, I generally do 2 1/4 because the 2 1/2 is a little bit wide, and I like a skinny frame. A lot of people do 2 1/2. Either way works well. Just be consistent.
How do you keep the quilt edge from rippling when you put the binding on with one long strip?
Okay, the quilt edge from rippling, as I'm going along here, I have, like, my machine is this big. And so my needle is here. I will lay this down flat so that it's flat on the machine, the binding is flat, and I'll put a pin here. And then I will stitch to that pin without letting it ripple, or, you know, I'm not stretching the binding and I'm not stretching the quilt. And about that far is how far I'll go. And then when my needle gets here, I'll move the pin, and I'll just, each time I'll flatten it and I'll make sure the runner's flat, and that keeps that edge really nice. The other thing that I didn't remember is if you're doing a long edge, like you're quilting along the edge, see how this is flapping up? I would baste along that edge before I trim the quilt. Okay, now we're doing this corner. We stopped 1/4 inch, turned it, and now we're folding this up. Our raw edge is making a straight line. Our pleat is folding right to the corner. We'll hold that down and flip this down. Now, we don't want this, I need to zoom in a little closer so you can see. We don't want any extra here. When we're looking under here, your crease is going straight to the corner. When we flip it down, it still needs to go straight to the corner. If you have a little bit extra, that's going to give you a lumpy corner that won't turn. So we'll go down, and it's kind of like a little sailboat sail, but this crease goes right to the corner. And again, we're going to start here and start driving, and away we go, and that is good. Okay, I'm turning my iron on because I want to show you the next thing, and that is, we've gotten all the way around the whole quilt. I have to come in. Okay, we're pretending. Let's pretend these edges are done. But we've gotten all the way around the whole table runner, and now it's time to join these ends together. And I kind of eyeball in the middle, and I'm going to fold this back, and I'm going to fold that back, and I'm leaving a little, let's see if I can get you right there. All right, I'm leaving just a little bit in between. I'm not folding them so that they're right next to each other. Now, okay, Kirk, are there questions? Okay, I'm giving this a blast of steam, so I'm getting a nice crease there. And again, they're not right touching. Okay, now I need my scissors, which is right here. Okay, now I need to trim these, and I'm not going to measure anything. I'm just going to use my binding as a measure, because then you don't have to remember, did I use 2.5 or did I use 2 1/4? Hard to say. So I'm just using the binding as a measure. Okay, now I've trimmed both of these, and now I'm going to make a diagonal. So I'm going to open up this guy, and I always have the raw edge of the table runner toward me and the fold of the binding away from me. So I'm opening this up, and I'm going to fold this and get that guy out of the way. I'm going to fold this so that it makes a nice corner. And I give it a little blast of steam. You can see where that other part was that I did. Now I'm going to fold this down, and steam is your friend here. You want to get these creases in here so that they stay. And now all I need to do is, this is going to tuck in here, and I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to go to the machine, and I'm going to sew. You need to zoom out on, okay. You can see that this, I'm going to sew down that diagonal crease. And that's going to open up and give me, see if I can get this in the camera. That's going to give me that diagonal join, which doesn't look diagonal here, but that is what we're doing. So first thing is, we pressed creases like this. Then on the left-hand one, I pressed a diagonal crease, and then I kind of tucked this in here, and I grabbed this, and you kind of have to scoot it over. And now these are positioned correctly so that I can sew on that diagonal and have it work. If you're ever not sure, put some pins in right on that diagonal where you're going to be sewing, and then you can check, did I do it right? And yes, I did, so you can go ahead and sew. But this way you don't have to think as hard and worry about how that binding is. Okay, so now we have done, we layered all of our batting and backing and table runner. We set up our machine. We did some quilting. We did the binding. And now it's time to go cook some good food and serve it at the table. That'd be kind of good. Anyway, please show how to trim the ends again. Did I show it again? Or
What's that?
there's a comment to see it again. But did they ask before I showed it or after?
They just asked it.
They just asked. Okay, I'll sew it again. Okay, so I've got my end, and we pressed it. Get my iron back. And let's use a different piece so that you can kind of see. I pressed it so that there's a little, just a little, oh, see, and I'm on the wrong camera. I cannot be trusted with technology. All right, now we're in the middle. Okay, so if this is our loose binding edge, I folded it over and I pressed a crease so that there's just a little space in between. Don't ask me why we need this space. It's not logical, but it works perfectly. Okay, then I'm going to use another scrap of binding and just lay that on top. And I'm going to trim. I'm looking to see if this is actually in the camera. I'm going to trim just next to that binding. So this is how I decide how big of a square that is just by using another piece of binding. Okay.
Finish sewing, binding, machine, or by hand?
Okay, I do finish everything on the machine, and I wrap my binding around. I stitch it to the right side. We're pretending this is the right side of my table runner, the turquoise. Wrap it around to the back, and then I stitch in the ditch right next to the binding. And I will, as I'm sewing, I can run my nail along and kind of feel that that is sticking underneath enough to get caught. And that works really well for me. It does take practice, and the best place to practice is on a table runner because it's not big. When you do it on a quilt, you have all that weight that wants to pull the quilt and make your stitching crooked. On a table runner, it just stays right on your table, and it's a perfect size for practicing. All right. Any more questions? Oh, no questions. Okay, so this is what we had today. These are our 4 patterns, and Hen and Chicks has a bundle for you, and it's, oh, I'm terrible at this. I think she said it's $30 for all 4, and it's normally $40, so that's a screaming deal. So we have Let's Play Hearts and Desert Stars and Mini Brick Road and Cha Cha Cha. So all 4 of those patterns. And if you were on the Facebook a little bit early, you saw Heidi did a video showing you all the amazing kits that she has. And I want some of those. They're really cute. So that is our table runner from start to finish. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and I look forward to seeing your table runners. We'll see you soon.